you can take off the face mask once you do it properly and you continue to practice the other measures. Okay, so if you're uncomfortable wearing the face mask for the entire duration of the session, by all means, take it off by using the loops around the ears. Don't touch the body of the mask, the front of the mask when taking it off. Around your chin or on your forehead or anything. If it's on, it's on.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, Prime Minister. Members of the media, we've just completed a 3.5-hour meeting of the Social Partnership. Prime Minister Mottley will outline first the outcome of that meeting, and then she will entertain questions from the media.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morris. Ladies and gentlemen of the media, ladies and gentlemen in Barbados, fellow Barbadians, it is indeed a pleasure for me to be speaking to you. I was getting too accustomed to speaking to you from my house. I am now happy back into the full swing of things, and today is my second day back at work, but it would be remiss of me if I did not thank all those who held the course for the nation for me. Starting with the Acting Prime Minister, Santia Bradshaw, the Attorney General, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Minister of Health, the ministers who were on the core subcommittee dealing with this, Minister of Innovation, Science and Technology, the Minister of Public Affairs and Information, and of course, my tall friend, the Minister of Labour. That subcommittee managed the whole situation of both the shutting down and the reopening of individual sectors of the country over the course of the last 7 weeks. It's almost difficult to believe that that time has gone already. Nevertheless, it has. On the last occasion on which I spoke to the country, we agreed on the opening and we indicated that we were at phase 2 and that given the trajectory, we were in a position then to undertake the opening of certain businesses in phase 2 and that we would review again based on the trajectory for phase 3. I'm happy to report that the Social Partnership would have had an update from the Chief Medical Officer, from Dr. Ford, from the Tsar, Mr. Richard Carter. It equally took an update on the economy and the country's finances from Dr. Greenidge and other members of the team and Minister Strawn. And we were able, in addition, to discuss a number of matters of fundamental import to the country. On the last occasion on which I spoke, we indicated that there were a number of matters that we would want to deal with, and on this occasion, perhaps the most important thing that we have done is to begin to set out the framework for what really is the mission ahead in the country for safe operations to continue across the board. The truth is that when we met on the 28th of May, 2018, one of the things we did was to set a common mission. On that occasion, the common mission was the saving of the value of the Barbados dollar. It is our judgment that it was in the setting of that common mission and the commitment by labor, by the private sector, and by government, and then generally the people of Barbados, to attaining that common mission, that we have been successful in that part of the mission. The truth also is that we face this crisis in a far better situation than many countries, largely as a result of our determination to restructure our debt when we did, which has created the fiscal space for us. On this occasion, we have taken a similar approach. What effectively is it that we want to do during the course of this pandemic? And how do we balance lives and livelihoods? And how do we build on what really has been from public health a determination that the continued downward trajectory is pretty much still taking place, and therefore we are in a position to better balance lives with livelihoods. And I use this to be able to show how easy it is for things to topple over if there is not balance. This afternoon, we therefore settled on three broad missions. How do we keep safe work for safe people in a safe country? How do we have safe work for safe people while trying to keep Barbados safe? Two, a subset of that, how do we get as many people into work again in Barbados as possible? And three, while we do that, how do we ensure that every household in Barbados can eat food every day? And those are the three things that at a broad level will occupy us, because if we can create the jobs, then we can minimize the contraction in the economy, and we can ultimately see that we would put ourselves back on a growth trajectory. If we can have a safe country, then people will want to be associated with this country and will want to come here ultimately when we open back up. If we can have safe work for safe people, then it means that those people who can in fact do the work because their immune system is strong, they are the least vulnerable to COVID, but they need to be able to work in order to support their families, and by extension, in particular, those in their families who, because of an uncontrollable comorbidity, a lot of fancy words for bad diabetes, out of control hypertension, out of control cancer, asthmatic, that some of those people may not, in the immediacy of the pandemic, and particularly given the jobs that they have, may not be able to carry the work. You've heard me say over and over that we may well have a situation where 2/3 of the population who can work will have to carry it for the other third. Now, I hope, however, that in our drilling down, we are in a position to put as many people back to work week by week by week without compromising the gains that the country has made with respect to where we are with COVID-19. The reality is that Barbados has tested a higher percentage of our population than a lot of countries in the world. I believe that we are close to just under 1.1 0.17% of the population when last I checked yesterday or day before. And that is a significant achievement, and by no means is something to be underestimated or to be ignored. The Chief Medical Officer can also tell us that additional 45,000 kits came into the country, and we have also sufficient swabs. We have more than 5,000 extractor kits to start, extraction kits to start, but we need to get more of those, because I've learned, I'm not a scientist or a doctor, but I've learned that you need all of these things in order to effectively test the population. And it meant, therefore, that we were able to significantly ramp up testing from about 2 to 3 weeks ago from where we were originally, because of a lack of access to testing kits. Not just in Barbados, I must tell you, but globally, and a lack of access to swabs as well as extractor kits, etc. It is against that background that we therefore recognize the need to balance lives and livelihoods. We learned this afternoon again, and we shared rather with the social partnership, that the National Insurance Scheme has now received 36,482 claims for unemployment benefit. That is a staggering amount in a country that roughly has a workforce of 140,000 persons. And it probably means that that represents probably about 26% of the workforce. And that had nothing to do with the underlying unemployment rate of 10%, 10.5% before the crisis really got into its own. I say that because it is important for you then to understand the 3 points in the mission that we've set ourselves. Safe work for safe people in a safe country, keeping as many people in Barbados in work or getting them back to work as is possible, and ensuring that every household can have access to food in this country. I said a few weeks ago that now is not a time for wants, it's a time for needs. I'm very clear on that. I could want a lot of things, but what is it that I need to be able to keep my head above water, and how best do I manage what I have to support me and my family at this difficult time? This country is going to have a lot of conversations as we go forward, and the truth is that I really do want to thank the private sector and the labor movement for recognizing that, yet again, Barbados is at its best when we have a whole-of-country approach and not just a whole-of-government approach. Against that background, we also discussed some other concerns that we have, and I will get to the point of explaining what will and will not be made in terms of adjustments from Monday the 18th of May. But before I get to that point, I want to just discuss a few quick things with you, because people must understand that your government is listening and we are hearing you, but we also are constrained in the manner in which we can respond given the difficulties that we face with respect to our circumstances. And I have stopped watching television, American television. I told you all that some time back, because the truth is that the diet of bad news with respect to COVID-19, and just watching that screen on the right-hand side with the numbers going up hour by hour as if the numbers don't represent human lives, is one of the most debilitating and depressing experiences I've ever had to endure in my life. And we are at danger of becoming desensitized to the notion that human beings are dying in this epidemic. We recognize that this has put us in a very difficult position. For Barbados, with a workforce of 140,000 people, to have 36,482 people claim unemployment benefit, we accept that some of that is as a result of the lockdown. As to what percentage, we can't tell you, so don't ask me what percentage, because I would be telling you a lie if I answered that. But we accept that with some businesses coming back on stream, more and more employees will not need to benefit from unemployment benefit in the long term. And they're entitled to, as you know, up to 6 months. But some of them may well be back in work within 4, 6, 8 weeks, depending on the nature of their employment. We accept that we have a duty to be our brothers and sisters' keeper. That is the Barbados that we know. That is the Barbados that we must continue to embrace. On 166 square miles, if we are not working together and with each other, we are going to run into problems in this nation. The social partnership, therefore, discussed as well the option that I raised on the last occasion on which I spoke, which is how do we best share the burden, and do we not need to look at some level of adjustment on the part of those of us who are working in the form not of wage cuts in the public sector, but what we call forced savings. In other words, to allow government to be able to spend money on other things, particularly capital projects, to be able to get more people working. And capital projects are not only construction-related projects, but they're also things like the digitization project. We were lucky that the loan from the Inter-American Development Bank has been signed within recent times, probably about 2 months ago, if so much, which will allow us, therefore, to be able to do the digitization of government's records. And a lot of people who previously worked into government or who previously worked in hotels or elsewhere may be able to help us. We accept that while that project was initially designed to be a 6-year project, we will probably have to advance and to literally rapidly execute other aspects of it. And we may even have to go beyond the loan to be able to digitize even things like the records in the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. As soon as you go in, you see that room with thousands and thousands of records, which ought to be digitized at this point in time. So we have to repurpose and come up with new estimates that reflect the reality of our situation. And to that extent, therefore, we are in a position to be able to look at other projects. We have to accept that now is the time that we can do more with water. We had hoped to be able to move on the combined problems that we face in the water authority and in the country with access to water at an earlier stage, but we knew we had to finish the debt restructuring. That debt restructuring finished, as you know, at the end of last year. And just as we were getting ready to move in, therefore, to an aggressive program, both for the purchase of equipment for the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, as well as an aggressive program for Water Authority to deal with a number of major projects, Vineyard that you've heard me talk about, to be able to relieve the pressure of the people in St. Joseph, to relieve the pressure of the people in St. Lucie, St. John in parts, in Christchurch. I think there's been 1 or 2 issues. And just as we were about to do that, the public health disaster pandemic came into its full. We have not stopped, however, and the Director of Finance is working with the Barbados Water Authority in order to be able to ensure that they will be able to borrow somewhere between 50 to 55 million, depending on the fine-tuning of an additional project that we're looking at. But it will also mean that the Capital Works program for expanded road works that Minister Duguid and his ministry is about to execute will also take into account the laying of mains at the same time, because you would surely agree with me that it makes no sense to break road, dig it up, and then not pave it back without putting in the mains, such that if you have a burst main again, you have to go and dig back up what Bajans would call nylon road. So in the circumstances, an expanded Capital Works program is critical, but in order for us to afford that, at the very same time as we are not earning money, we may have to agree how we agree to put on hold some of the things that we would otherwise get. The social partnership advised us, both the private sector and the labor movement, that their members have been facing similar situations and that in many instances that they have asked workers to take cuts ranging from about 15%, 10-15%, right up as high as generally 50%, but in some instances the head of the private sector indicated 100%, and I would imagine that that is where obviously there are people who have the wealth base to agree to forego any form of income, and that certainly is not par for the course. We agreed that we will meet back next week to begin to ask ourselves how best we will address those three questions. Government certainly has its perspective, but we want labor and the private sector to share theirs so that we have an agreed program of action, because we all know that Barbados is not the only country suffering in the world against this pandemic. And we all know that countries are, like us now, thinking, how best do we come back? How can we be fitter and more resilient as we come back in this respect? To that extent, therefore, we have to be able to address the water issue as a matter of urgency. We hear you, we're going to work with you, but we also recognize that we're up against a drought and a major groundwater crisis that is as a result of the climate crisis that the world is facing. And many of you will recall that less than 2 months ago, Dr. Mwanza gave evidence before the whole Committee of Whole, the Budget Committee of the House of Assembly, and indicated that when they went into Bowmanston, that what would normally be 17 feet of water, that they found less than 3 to 4 feet, that it was coming below his waist. And that is an example of the kind of stress that we are facing in this country with respect to water. It is why we've encouraged people to buy water tanks. It is why we will unfold a program with Water Authority for people to access those water tanks. The second major area that we're conscious of, and I'm glad that Minister Bradshaw is here, is the issue of access to digital tablets or machines in order for e-learning to take place. Now, you would know that for me, this is a matter that I am very, very strong on. I do not believe that we can have two Barbadoses. I do not believe that we can have a situation where one set of people have access to learning tools and the other set of people are left without. This country's success has come as a result of the fact that it has always, even in the dark days of colonialism, there was a firm commitment to the provision of education to as many people as possible, such that in the year 1900, at the beginning of the 20th century, 120 years ago, Barbados had 200 primary schools, 6 secondary schools, and 1 institution given university-type education, namely Codrington College. It cannot be that 120 years later, when the metrics as to what constitutes fair access to education have changed, that we will now drop the ball. And to that extent, therefore, I want to salute the Minister for reaching out and working with the teachers. The truth is that we were working towards this. We were in discussions with the Kenyans and others for a later period, but the pandemic, COVID, has literally catapulted us into this immediately. And therefore, I have to make adjustments to the budget in order to be able to ensure that those who can least afford and who parents cannot afford to be able to access, that we are in a position to help. I do not normally support means testing, I must tell you. But on this occasion with tablets, we will have to agree that those families who can buy their own will continue to do so, and the government will provide the resources for those who cannot do so. And we are in the process of working that out with the Ministry of Education. We're still in the early days. We hope that everything will be ready for sure for the September term, to the extent that we can have people ready for some level in this term. We're working hard, but we're conscious that it's not just a money issue, it is a supply and logistics issue, because just as we were having problems with accessing ventilators, we are conscious that people are having problems with accessing tablets, largely because everywhere across the world has been catapulted into an e-learning environment. In addition to that, we are conscious, and believe you me, that the transport situation with respect to the densities that we've now had to put in place as a result of the requirements of public health means that we may have to make some decisions. And I'm happy, I think Minister Duguid can report that as we meet here today, that there were others meeting within the transport subsector. We are aware that not in every instance, regrettably, transport providers have adhered to the 60% that we have asked them to adhere to. We are reminding them of it. It is for their own benefit. We recognize, and we will continue to see what other forms of equipment we can get to disinfect and to clean in a more efficient and effective way all areas of mass movement, mass transit, etc. But in the interim, we believe that the government, I am told that the buses, the 33 buses which the Transport Board ordered, the electric buses, will come at the end of June, early July. But in the interim, the government is of the view that we are going to have to augment the bus capacity, both with working with the private sector, privately owned buses, not only the traditional B and ZM, but we may have to look at some of the coaches as well, to include some of the coaches into the Transport Board's fleet through rental and working with the owners of those vehicles, and in particular starting with the Ross Transport Co-op, because as you know, the Ross University has not resumed operations as yet, but there was a large co-op of buses that was formed in order to be able to facilitate the movement of the students from where they live to this, in fact, this very site, which is their school. In addition, I've asked the Minister to facilitate discussions also with the taxi drivers and others, because we need to be able to ensure that we can have affordable and accessible transport as far as possible. And there are some people who will want to get somewhere, may not necessarily want to be exposed in a bus, but may be prepared to go in a taxi. But we need to have a transparent system for charging, and the technology can allow us to do that now in terms of the distance traveled with apps that we use. But at the same time, we also need to ensure that in addition to the absence of a meter and using the technology for the setting of distance and the rates for the fares per kilometer, that we also use it for availability, so that a person does not have to move from St. Lucie to Spooners Hill to pick up somebody when there's a taxi that's in Black Rock that can do the job closer. So how best do we leverage the technology with the existing taxi drivers and owners in order to be able to augment access, affordable and reliable access to public transport in Barbados, whether through buses, ZRs, minibuses, coaches, or taxis. And I think that we can do it together, and I give the country the assurance that one of the first things on my return will be working with Minister Duguid and his sector to be able to get this right. I've said those few things because in the context of the continued discussions for what I call forced savings, which is a form of bonds, to the extent that if we have to work with public officers to avoid layoffs in government, that we look at a form of forced savings. But that is the conversation that we have to have next week now. We're not having it today, and we want to be able to give everybody the opportunity, because the truth is that we have to save, we have to cut some expenditure, even in spite of the fiscal space that we've got. We are in a comfortable position. The International Monetary Fund is recommending to its board in early June that we be allowed to move from a 6% primary surplus to a 1%. A lot of fancy language. What does it mean? That it will give us at least $550 million in elbow room. But what do we need that for? The truth is that while we thought at the end of March our loss of revenue might be in the vicinity of $250 million, it is looking, as I said to you the last time I spoke, more like over $450 million because of the extent to which the shutdown globally, not here alone, but globally is affecting us. In spite of that, we are meeting with all kinds of people. The airlines are anxious to go. They want to set dates. We've said to them, we can't move to a set date. We have to move to a set protocols to ensure that we have safe work for safe people in Barbados. There is one other matter before I come to the lockdown that I raised with the Social Partnership today, and I hope to do so with the Jobs and Investment Advisory Council when I meet with them next week too. And that is the whole question of the National Population Commission's report on basically the Barbados population situational analysis. Now, had we not had the pandemic, this would have been the subject of discussion nationally in the months of February and March. But regrettably, it was displaced by the pandemic. And why do I say so? The executive summary, which we will make available to the public, and we will make available to members of the Social Partnership first and the Jobs and Investment Advisory Council, makes for a very sober picture. And the main findings, for example, relate to the fact that since 1960, birth and fertility rates in Barbados have consistently fallen. Since the year 1960, birth and fertility rates have fallen. Indeed, fertility rates in Barbados since 1980 have dropped below replacement level. So we're not even producing enough people to replace our population. And we had a sense of this when we were in opposition, and that's one of the reasons why for the first time the country established a National Population Commission, because we recognized that it had serious implications for our quality of life, the stability of our revenue, the stability of our society, the stability of our social security system. And to that extent, therefore, what this report has presented to us has confirmed what our instincts told us for the last few years, and it is not good. The country will have a greater opportunity to discuss it, but I raise it only from the point of view that we are going to have to take urgent action, because if we were simply to have kept replacing our population from 1980, Barbados would have 360,000 people today instead of the 280-odd thousand that we have. It gets worse because it also means that, regrettably, our workforce will actually be smaller by the year 2035 in less than 15 years than it is now, so that we will have a declining workforce which cannot sustain the production of goods and services, or indeed the revenue to be able to guarantee the quality of life that we currently have. And that finally, over the next 30 years, and I may not be here, I'm a little more worried about the 15 years and now. If I'm here 30 years from now, then I'm sure I'll be watching others from here on this Thursday evening from my house and being told that I'm one of the ones that have to stay home. But in the next 30 years, the dependency ratio will grow to nearly 2 dependents per person of working age. So that will place tremendous strain on our national insurance system if we're not careful. So I raise that to be able to show you that as we resolve these problems going forward, if we don't start working on this right away, remember what you were doing, Barry, 15 years ago. Remember what I was doing 15 years ago. 15 years, Delcia, is just the other day. And it will come and go so quickly. Most people don't realize that Prime Minister Thompson has been dead 10 years this year. That's how fast the time goes. And I can remember seeing him addressing the country as if it was yesterday. So, I want the country to recognize that over the course of the next few weeks and months, we're going to have all kinds of conversations. Some I would like the private sector to lead, some I would like the labor movement to lead, some I'd like the government to lead, and some we will do collectively. Ministers will also be required to start to process and to discuss. We're about to go in and have to go in not only with the tablets, but we're going to have to go into a major restructuring in terms of e-governance. We were getting there. We just have to expedite it, and Minister McConney knows that. The digital ID card, I think the country heard her last year when she said that the cards that were bought before have all had to be thrown away because they were kept in a warehouse for a number of years. They were no longer useful. We're in a position where we believe this year we can move on getting that national digital ID card going. But for us to do it means that we are literally going to have to be focused in terms of the execution of that. And it then allows for people to have access to money and to have access to services without having to present themselves, which is exactly what we need in this COVID-type environment. How long will this last? Who knows it? Who knows it across this world? Not a fella. And the bottom line, therefore, is that we have to prepare to live with COVID. We have to prepare to live with COVID in our midst in the medium to long term. There may or may not be a vaccine, and WHO has been consistent, as well as PAHO, saying that you may not even ever have a vaccine. But if there is no vaccine, what we hope for is a therapeutic. In other words, a medicine that can help cure people and ensure that people don't suffer as badly as they might otherwise do. And for us, the other bridge before the therapeutic is the issue of testing. And that is why, and please, if Barbadians don't hear nothing else from me, there are two types of tests. The international media confuse the two all the time. One is an antibody test for people who have had it, and the other one is the test that we do here, which is the antigen test, which is to test whether you have it, not had it, whether you in fact are infected with COVID today as we speak when you're taking the test. The problem is that the day that or let me put it another way, that test for the moment takes 3 to 4 hours for us to get results. And we tend to batch it and do it, and we've invested in more equipment for the lab. And I really want to commend Ms. Beckles and those at the Dos Santos lab for an excellent job. They have been working beyond the call of duty in terms of doing the testing 7 days a week. And as I said, we've expanded significantly. But the day that we can get a rapid test that is reliable, it may not be 99%, but it can allow us to manage risk better, is the day that we can take even more chances with our borders and other things. And that's why we haven't got there yet, and that's what we're working with both at the interregional level within CARICOM, because I suspect that that is where you're going to see some movement open up first, and then possibly some level of piloting in the other rest of the region, not necessarily here, because we're adamant that there has to be safe work for safe people. And once we're satisfied of that, then we can move to the next stage. Against that background, ladies and gentlemen, I want to come now very quickly to the things that we can and we believe we can do. I want to thank Barbadians, and believe you me, I hear people complaining about the few who are playing the fool, and I have taken note, and we're going to deal with some of them where we have to. But for the vast majority of people in this nation have taken to heart the guidelines set out by the Ministry of Health and the public health officials. And I want to thank us, because we could not be having this conversation today if we had not done that. And therefore, I know Mr. Carter has had to exercise a heavy rod sometimes of correction when he has seen wrong being done. And he has correctly said that if you do it and it really puts us at risk, the same way how we are moving back the lockdown, we can lock back if we have to. Because the one thing we're not going to do is to put at risk the gains that we've made as a country. But having said that, we accept that the very existence, our very existence in life means taking risk. I take a risk when I cross the road. I take a risk when I literally jump over a ditch that I feel that I can make it. And hopefully I'll make it, but I take a risk. So we take risk in certain things in our life, and it is how best we manage the risk now presented from this pandemic. Against that background, therefore, the subcommittee that was established of the social partnership recommended, and after consultation with the Ministry of Health and then coming back to the full social partnership this evening, the changes that we will have will be as follows as of Monday, the 18th of May. One, these are the businesses that will be allowed to reopen. Small cottage industries, repair services, fridge breakdown, television breakdown, equipment breakdown, air conditioner, repair services, bookstores, flower shops, and home furnishings. And in all of these, the condition is that the relevant protocols on physical distancing are observed. In the case of appliances, we've listened to the private sector very carefully, and we recognize that some people's appliances may break down to the point of not being able to be repaired, and therefore we have worked with them to develop protocols for safe delivery of appliances to people's houses and the installation. In some instances, as you know, appliances have also to be installed and can't just be left at people's front door. And to that extent, therefore, Environmental Health and the Ministry of Labour have worked with, under the guidance of the AG and Minister Bradshaw, Minister Bostic, and members of the private sector and the union to be a clearinghouse for these protocols. Hairdressers and barber shops will also be allowed to be open. I look around this room, I must tell you that I'm almost regretting saying it because some of the men now have afros or close to afros, and I'm beginning to like how they look, as opposed to the bald heads that I may see soon again. I look at the governor, I look at the attorney general, I look at the head of the hotel association, and I'm looking at you too, but and for those of us who are ladies, I know that a number of ladies are in dire need, but there are safe protocols that can be put in place with the mask and the different sanitizing, etc., and we've gone through that. Restaurants will be allowed to open only for drive-through, for delivery, and for takeaway. And by takeaway, we mean place your call before arriving at the restaurant, the AG has reminded me, as opposed to just turning up at the restaurant and decide you want to buy takeaway. And we will ensure that these entities work with us. I'm sure that there are a lot of people breathing easily that as of Monday, they don't have to be cooking as much as they've cooked in the last 7 weeks. I've heard a lot of people say that they've gotten tired of their own cooking. But hopefully they've learned to love it now in between as we go forward. With respect to persons who provide household help, housekeepers, we will also agree for them to start back working, and we're conscious, and I've asked this one may not start before next week, Wednesday, the 20th of May, because the Ministry of Health would like now to be able to do some special videos for training to be able to provide both to the homeowners as well as to the people working in the houses. And that would be the only exception in terms of the 18th because of the concern that we really do need to provide the sensitivity, the sensitization and the training to both employers and employees with respect to that. We do expect that there are going to be some households where people say, I don't need anybody again, and we do expect that there are going to be some people who were previously housekeepers who say, I'm not prepared to go back there again. But for the general part, that will be allowed. We also expect that churches, originally we had indicated that churches would have a small limit that was different from the numbers that they were allowed for funerals. And we have agreed that the number for both normal services and funerals would be the same 20 now, so that 20 persons, but we accept that there is a case to be made depending on the size of the facility, and Minister Jordan will be consulting with Minister Ford and the churches to be able to work out a density ratio that makes sense so that we can start to have persons, because a lot of people really, as much as they've enjoyed the streaming, and I want to congratulate the churches for their innovation. Some were doing it already, but a lot more are doing it now. But in spite of that, I know that it must be very difficult for a preacher to be preaching to an empty hall, an empty building, and to that extent, without compromising the safety of congregants, we want to be able to get it right. Until we have that consultation completed and the density ratios worked out between public health and the churches facilitated by Minister Jordan and Minister Ford, we therefore will simply balance it, 20 persons for services, whether it be normal services or funeral services, and I would imagine wedding services too. The sports, the best protection against COVID-19 is a strong immune system. And to that extent, therefore, we feel that we can begin to allow persons to get and reap some of the benefits that we have from the 7-week lockdown that has taken place thus far. We will allow contactless sports. And what do we mean by that? Persons can go running, they can walk, they can cycle, they can play tennis, road tennis, and even in doing this, we're asking people, because we know that very often a road tennis game might attract some people watching. Well, make sure that when you're watching, that you can spread out your hands and the body up underneath you. And I'm asking people, only you can know to protect yourself. And remember, as I keep saying, in protecting yourself, you're protecting those whom you love and those whom you need. So at the end of the day, this is not a directive from on top. This is an entreaty for you to be able to love yourself more than you love anybody else, and then love who live at you as much. And to that extent, if you love yourself and you love who live at you, then you will take no foolish chances by bunching up underneath people. We will add now to the swimming in the morning for the beaches, not just between 6 to 9, but also between 4 to 6:30 in the evening, because we recognize and we heard people that there are a number of persons who are bad, have bad arthritis, or may not have people to move them early in the morning to the sea, and the sea is maybe a little too cold in the morning. They would prefer to go in the afternoon and to exercise, walk, and to move, and that will help them control their pressure and the diabetes. We're allowing you to do that. And then, of course, for those who like golf, I'm not a golfer, so I can't help you with that, but I know that there are a lot of men and women who play golf and who walk, and that too is a contactless sport. Others have asked about cricket. We've asked about getting the protocol. We know it's cricket season. I know Mr. Clark and others are avid cricketers and fans. I'm not sure how much cricket he can play nowadays, but we will have those continued protocols completed. But at this point in time, no gyms, no cricket, no football. Those things are a little too close. We're leaving also for Phase 4. We're not opening at this stage betting and gaming shops or places of public entertainment, restaurants for in-house dining. We're going to continue to see where we go. but we recognize that it is hard for those persons. But at this point in time, we believe that if we continue to do these things in chunks that we can manage and control, to the extent that we have something that goes beyond or a spike, we are in a position, one, with the expanded capacity that we have, to be able to do the contact tracing. And you've heard over and over and over, testing and tracing, testing and tracing. You don't have to hear it from me, you hear it from everybody across the world. And secondly, that we have the hospital capacity with respect to the expanded facilities at Harrison's Point now. And I place in context again, Barbados would have had no more than 25, 30 beds in ICU for most of our existence as a modern nation. We now have 78 beds in intensive care at Harrison's Point, and we have 120 secondary care beds as well. So we are well positioned to meet any eventualities. And part and parcel of the lockdown as well was not just to lock it off, because you can't lock it off because people will atrophy and die. But what we were doing was giving ourselves time to, Anton, because of the disruption in the supply chain, to be able to complete, and I haven't had a chance publicly to congratulate and commend all of those who not just have built Harrison's Point, but have now made Harrison's Point operational in the last few weeks based on the delays, in spite of the delays with the supply of equipment and machinery, but it is fully functional for our persons. So with those not so few words, but most necessary words, I invite questions from the floor, but I also, before I do that, would like to ask any members of the private sector or any members of the labor movement if there's anything they would wish to add as we address the country. Sorry? And the last thing is the curfew hours remain what they were. No change, that's why. So it is still the 8 p.m. to 5 a.m. in the morning. And therefore, you cannot be on the road during those hours without lawful excuse, either through a pass period, but lawful excuse because of what you're doing working. Okay? The last point that I'm being reminded is that we have agreed that the alphabet system will remain in place, but you can shop at any time during the opening hours in the supermarkets. So if you are A and B and G, H, I, J, K, I think I remember roughly, it means you can shop anytime on a Monday instead of being reserved. Thank you. A, B, and G, H, I, J, K would normally be Monday morning and Monday afternoon. Those letters can now shop at any time on Monday. And similarly, they can go to the bank. The banks will now resume their normal opening hours. The only requirement is that you stick to the alphabet to go into the bank on those days, but the normal hours will be there. Obviously, each person still has 2 days, so the AB people get Monday and Friday. M, which is me, I haven't seen a supermarket in God knows how long. Tuesday and Friday too. So I forget, Ms. Moore is M2. So Tuesday and Friday. So we would go, instead of being reserved now to before lunch or after lunch, you can shop at any time during the day on those days. But we're sticking to the alphabet. And why? Because we are reminded by public health and ISAR that we still want to maintain some control over the density in there. Ed, do you want to say anything?
Thanks, Prime Minister. First of all, I want to welcome the Prime Minister back physically and wish her continued improvement in her health and long life. Prime Minister, it has been a pleasure working with the Acting Prime Minister Bradshaw at the time, and their team. And I think the private sector has done a lot to work with the members of the social partnership, especially on the government side as well, to try to ensure that we have set protocols in place to ensure the safety of all Barbadians, of our employees and the public at large. It is critical that the members of the public follow the protocols that the government has established and that we in the private sector have established for our businesses on reopening. And I think that is something that we want to share. The government has agreed to put these protocols on the GIS website, and we at the BPSA and the other member organizations of the private sector will be doing likewise, and I believe members of the labor movement will be doing likewise. It is critical that people follow the regulations. We have to protect all Barbadians at this time. Prime Minister, I want to thank you for expanding the hours of operation of the businesses and also expanding the type of businesses that could open on Monday the 18th. It is critical that Barbadians get back to work and the Barbados economy gets back to work. We cannot afford as a country to have 37,000 people unemployed at any one time, and that is adding to the other 10%. We have to change that. The private sector is going to do all that it can to ensure that we keep people employed for as long as we can. And we want to ask the Barbadian public to come out and to support these Barbadian business people, the Barbados employees who are going back to work. It is important that we keep them at work and that we don't have a dependency on our government to provide for so many Barbadians. So we ask the wider public to support the businesses and to support the employees. We want to thank the Ministry of Health and the health officials for doing all that they have done to stabilize this COVID situation in Barbados. I don't think we will ever be rid of COVID, but it is critical that we manage our lives and our economy while managing the health situation as well. And I ask all Barbadians to support the government's efforts in this regard, and we look forward to continuing our work with the government to ensure the safety and health of all Barbadians. So, Prime Minister, we look forward to the longer opening or the additional openings and the longer bank hours at this time. And we continue to ask for more things to be reopened in the future.
Thank you very much, and we will continue to move as quickly as we can because, believe you me, the balance between lives and livelihoods matter. Labour, anybody wants to speak?
Good evening, Madam Prime Minister. Good evening, Barbados. We trust that the collection of persons and these consultations serve to drive home the seriousness of the pandemic and the threat to the civilization as we know it. From time to time, I've heard some murmurings and some complaints. I want to take this opportunity to assure all workers that the Congress will not resile from the business of representing workers' interests. Having said that, however, we are also calling on workers to recognize the seriousness of the situation before us, and as has been said so many times before, let's all join hands and hearts to serve this nation, which we love so dearly, the nation of Barbados. Thank you.
Thank you. I thought you were going to say, let's join hands and show how much we love Barbados. And then you would have broken into the melody.
Well, that too.
Anyone else? Right. Any questions, please? Members of the press? I know they're always late. Mr. Allen, yes, sir.
Good evening, Prime Minister. I noticed you mentioned the curfew. Finally, can you give us an indication if we are a little closer to seeing the curfew hours amended so as to allow people a little more space to move around outside of their employment?
as we continue to improve, then we're in a position to get back closer to that type of movement that we would normally have had. I think we are clear that we are not out of the woods, but we are a lot better than we anticipated. I think that the Chief Medical Officer would tell you, and these are, that the models which had been done by the University of the West Indies showed that had we not intervened, we would probably have somewhere, I think, between 12 to 1,500 people losing their lives and thousands of people contracting the COVID in this country. I'm not going to do like elsewhere and certain other places and make idle promises just for the sake of making them. This government wants to move hand in hand with the private sector and the labor movement to ensure that we have safe work for safe people. At this point in time, until we can contain fully what we think to be the full risk, we do believe that there's still some need for limitations, but I'm confident that we've been lucky thus far that we've been able to release and to remove from constraint and restraint different areas of activity. So long and short, hold tight. If we continue doing what we've been doing, it should not be forever, but we have to make sure that we take the appropriate protocols and keep each other as safe as possible. But for now, for now, we need it.
And a follow-up question, Prime Minister. In the last 7 weeks, we've seen some social resistance, we've seen some pushback, and we've even seen some confusion within the populace. Were you to grade government's interventions over that 7 weeks, how would you?
I don't grade. I don't grade. We were elected not to pass grades. We were elected to serve the people. Will we do that with perfection every day of the week, every week of the year? Probably not, because we are not divine, we are not God. And the occasions that we have fallen down, I've said to this government and to the members, public servants and political class, that we acknowledge where we've fallen wrong and we move again and get it right. What matters at this point more than anything else is keeping people alive, keeping people safe, keeping people fed. So maybe if I had done some teaching before I came into government, I might have gotten into the habit of grading, but since I never did, I've never fallen into that habit.
Prime Minister Mottley, Shane Jones, CBC. I know a lot of anxious parents would have been watching this and asking questions. Is there any update on anything to do with the common entrance?
I think Minister Bradshaw wants to have her own date with you. Is that correct? She'll speak to you very shortly. But there have been some developments, and she will address the country shortly on it.
Okay. And Prime Minister, follow-up. It would be remiss of me if I didn't ask this question. It's just been floating around everywhere. Since about 2 weeks ago, when the COVID-19 czar made a passing mention at the terminology of community spread, there hasn't been anything said, I don't think, from government's point of view.
I thought the government, the czar is a part of the government, Mr. Carter. I didn't realize you were still working for the government of Sierra Leone. Or the British government. If you want to ask him about it, feel free, please.
Okay, so just for some clarity, because people are asking, Mr. Carter, is there community spread in Barbados? People have been asking, saying that we've been seeing definitions of what it is and also explanations of what is happening in Barbados, but people are wondering if it's a bit of skirting around if there is a definite yes or no if there is community spread in Barbados.
I think the statements that were made were quite clear. We define community spread as a situation where we had a case that we could not link to an index case, a case that was unlinked. We had, at the time that I spoke, 2 such cases. Therefore, by definition, we had 2 cases that we could not identify, and therefore, those constituted community spread. We must not take it out of proportion, yes, because if those 2 cases suddenly remembered where they had been and came forward, then that does not constitute community spread because we are able to identify where those cases are. We do not have, on the basis of the widespread testing that we've conducted, more than 1% of the population. We don't have any evidence of significant numbers of the population coming down with COVID that we've been unable to identify.
I think that's my follow-up, because I think, people might be wondering if you said yes, if it's something huge to freak out about. So I'm wondering...
Perhaps Dr. Best can help.
Yeah, Dr. Best. So those two instances that we have, is it a situation for Barbadians to be freaking out?
So let me just add on to what Mr. Carter would have explained just now. At the time the statements were made, we had a couple cases, literally 2 cases, in which we did not have an epidemiologic link. So from a layman's perspective and a layman's jargon, you can use the term community transmission, but you really meaning that you cannot explain where those persons got it from. However, I would caution us going forward, simply because the WHO has a more strict definition of community spread, more scientific definition of community spread, where they say large numbers of persons for whom you cannot attribute or for who you cannot give an explanation as to why they have it. And that is certainly not the case in Barbados. And the reason why I'm cautioning it is because it's an entire category, and we're not at that category in Barbados. We're at the category of containment in terms of describing the epidemic in Barbados. We are constantly looking. We would have talked about the trends in Barbados, how the rate of detection of cases has come down. And what we also did is to increase the rate of testing. So we even started to look more, assuming that it may be out there. We only have 4 cases right now, 4 recently diagnosed cases that we're still actively doing contact tracing for. Okay, so I hope I can lay this issue to rest.
Thank you. I think it did.
Okay.
Anything else?
Hi, good
Yes,
afternoon,
sir.
Prime Minister. You mentioned some further businesses which will reopen from Monday, but I didn't hear you speak as relates to childcare for those employees who may have to go back out to work.
I wish I could. Schools and childcare, we're working through the protocols. I know that Santia has been very diligent, as well as Cynthia, in looking at it. Public health has some concerns that are real. I don't know, in my layman's world would have said, let's get at least the primary school children back out. But then there's the issue of controlling primary school children and them coming back into the household and all kinds of things. So I'm not prepared to advise myself or for the government to advise itself on these matters. But suffice it to say that that is part of phase 4 at the earliest. And we are working diligently, but we are sensitive to the fact that some people who have to go back out to work do need support for their children or somebody to keep them. And in some instances where the grandparents are sick or at risk, that is not an option. So we are trying to get our heads around it. It is a serious issue, not just for us, but we see it globally. You hear Governor Cuomo talking about it all the time with the children of the protective services and others who have also to be taken care of. So we're asking, truthfully, the extended family to play a role. And this is Mia talking now. This is not the Prime Minister talking. If you got family, help out one another, because that's what family is for. And it may well be that you can't go by your parents because they're at risk, but you have a cousin, a first cousin, a nephew, a niece, somebody. That's the Bajan way. Let's do it. And there's going to be no perfection. And that's why, Barry, I wasn't being facetious. I'm not into the business of grading. And I'm going to work hard and work the government harder. Last night I watched a documentary on Michael Jordan. It's called The Last Dance. I would recommend people to watch it. I watched it late last night, about midnight, as I was reading cabinet papers. And it was the episode that talked about how miserable Michael Jordan was and how much he pushed people. And I started to smile, so I don't feel too bad when my cabinet describes me now as being miserable and pushing them too hard. Because as Michael Jordan reminded them, it's about the fact that they were also happy to be winners. And at the end of the day, we like to win, but life is not just about winning. It's also about doing what is right and doing it in the right way. And in a sense, it does not mean I know when I've dropped the ball and others have dropped the ball. And we get up and we apologize and move on. Okay?
Prime Minister, oh, sorry.
Good evening, IQ Level, Starcom Network News. Just for clarity, given the economic fallout due to COVID-19, can we expect any job or pay cuts within the public sector going forward?
I think you heard me say earlier, I'm sure, that we had a discussion this evening in the context that we will continue next week and continue because we do have to cut expenditure. We do not want to cut jobs. And we do feel, however, that some form of burden sharing is appropriate. And I think I can fairly say that if that is the view of both the labor movement and the private sector, then there should be no further job cuts for the sake of COVID. There may always be job cuts, what I call it, for structural, what's the phrase I used earlier, for restructuring of institutions. But that's not what your question is about. And I think the Nation newspaper tried to suggest, I laughed, in January this year that job cuts and increased taxes were coming. It is now May. I'm not sure where they're coming, but that was because I answered a question honestly that can I tell you as leader of Barbados that there will never be a job loss or there will never be a tax increase? I would never do that. I would never hobble the people of Barbados into that situation where the country's well-being comes to stand at the mercy of a politician's word. Okay?
Prime Minister, you would have
But
mentioned...
we will continue the conversation. We're very much in the process. I put it out there before. That's what this meeting is about. And let me thank them because as many people as you see here, there were more people on Zoom who were also involved in this meeting today. But the meeting was serious enough that we felt we had to come to LASC and to be spread out as we are because we are now dealing with serious matters to be able to put this country on forth. But equally as we discussed that, we discussed the need for 24-hour work, we discussed the need for the completion of flexi policy. As it relates to public servants, you would have noticed that I have not made any changes to the public servants who are already out and for more to come next week. Why? Because we are conscious of the density in the public transport system, and therefore we want to be able to give ourselves another 2 weeks before we put that additional pressure on the public transport system, recognizing that the private sector has a more urgent need to keep businesses alive now. The government is not sending home anybody so that we can continue with the telework until we have proper flexi-work policies in place, as the NUPW and Mr. McDowell and Ms. Burke have asked us to look at. Thank you.
Prime Minister, you would have mentioned the 36,000 claims that the NAS is now attempting to process, and the natural assumption would be that that would take a particular amount of time, but for those persons who are out there waiting for money to be disbursed, can you in any way give us an idea when they might be seeing some checks with some
They've started
zeros
already,
on them?
Barry.
Pardon?
They've started already, and quite a few people have received benefits processed, and to the best of my 19,000 people, more than half, have received their benefits already, and most of them who received them would have gotten it for more than 1 week, I think 3 weeks. 3 weeks? 3 or 4 weeks they would have received so that they don't have to be sending it out all of the time. But believe you me, they're working as fast as they can, okay?
Given the easing
I'm conscious that we are half hour away from the curfew. Not that I want to stop you, because I'm ready to having not had a chance to answer questions for multiple weeks. I actually feel as though I'm now playing into form. So if I can't play cricket, I can at least sing. But we'll take one more question before we shut down, because I'm conscious that workers have to get home. AG, I'll ask you and the police not to be insensitive to the fact that in the interest of the state that we've had to meet here today, and in the presence of all Barbadians who are witnesses now to our location.
Prime Minister Andre Springer from the Barbados Advocate. With the further relaxation of measures, there are going to be more people on the road. Is there going to be a consideration to making masks mandatory instead of just a recommendation?
From the very beginning, we've said that when I spoke, I think last time or the time before last, that we encourage people to use them. I have a difficulty. We can't make them mandatory because I do not know if we have enough cloth in Barbados to supply a mask for everybody. Making it mandatory means that there's a penalty if you don't use it. And to that extent, what the Ministry of Health has said, that wearing of masks is encouraged in areas of mass movement, public transport, supermarkets, going shopping, in buses, etc. In this meeting, you would have heard the CMO advise us of the protocol. It's very difficult for people to talk with masks on. The physical distancing is there. We have to be able to use a scalpel rather than anything else in explaining to Bajans where masks are appropriate. As far as possible, you wear a mask on the assumption, as you've heard, that you yourself have COVID and you don't want to share it with anybody. If I was sitting in a bus with somebody in front of me 2 feet, if I'm in the supermarket, same thing. It will encourage people not to linger in the supermarket and talk. Because believe you me, this, as you are now discovering, this is the most difficult thing to talk through. And for those of us who wear glasses, if you ever try to have this on and talk, you get an immediate fog across your glasses. So we are conscious that we are encouraging it from the point of view of people assuming that they want to take care of those around them, but it has to be appropriate to location as well. So not every place, but as far as possible. Barbados, and not every form of cloth is appropriate. So we need to make sure that we have supply before we can make anything mandatory and make criminals out of people for not adhering. But for those of you who don't have masks, I've seen a lot of YouTube videos for other contraptions and cloth that people can use. Okay, I think that allows us to come to the end. Rest assured, and now that I'm back out, hopefully I'll be able to engage with you all a lot more, so don't feel that you've lost out on anything tonight. We will continue to speak to you regularly, but for this occasion, I think the Attorney General is now in a position for us to conclude the directives, and those directives will be issued. The private sector and the labour movement both have certainty as to what will happen Monday, and likelihood we will either be meeting Wednesday or Friday next week, depending on what is more appropriate for labour and the private sector to continue these discussions. Thank you very much, and everyone, please be safe and get home safely. Thank you.